Hi, thank you for joining me. Mindy Mandell here. And today what I want to talk about is Proclus's Elements of Theology. It's really a very clever book. He modeled it after Euclid's Elements of Geometry. What Euclid did was he started with just a point and he made a number of propositions, building all of geometry really from this one proposition, starting with the definition of a point. He went from a point to a line to two-dimensional figures, three-dimensional, and so on. And Proclus got the idea from that he could do the same thing with theology. And so what he wanted to do was strip away all of the spiritual and cultural language and so on, and just looking at pure logic, ask what conditions must exist for anything to be, and to build a whole metaphysics from that. This is one of his shorter works. I have a few translations of his here. This one is Thomas Taller's translation, and this one here is really just a bare bones translation. Very few notes, and so you can see it's quite thin. Another translation, and maybe a more common one, and the one I'm going to use today, is E.R. Dodd's. This one has some notes at the beginning and also commentary at the end. I think the current edition of it has a different cover, but the inside is the same. And what it has is the Greek on one side of the page and the English on the other. And even with all those additions, it's still not very thick. I'll put the two side by side. You can see it's not very thick. And so I think many people come to this one first, thinking that it's a little shorter, it's a little bit less intimidating than some of his longer writings. He's known for being rather prolix, and so it's kind of intimidating for some people. What we're going to find is that it's kind of a double-edged sword, because being shorter also means that it's more terse, and so there's a lot packed into very little bit there, very few words, and so you've got to unpack a lot, which can make it actually more difficult. In some ways, the longer writings, because they're wordy, they give you a little more meat on the bones, and it may actually be a little bit easier to get into. But we're going to look actually at where I want to look at how he started here, his proposition 1, to see what he's building it all on. Euclid started with the definition of a point. We're going to see what Proclus started with. So we're going to first look at his Elements of Theology. Later I'm going to go to his Theology of Plato. It's much thicker, as you can see. Put the two side by side. So it is a bit intimidating for some people. The book is, bigger than my head. So it is intimidating, but we're going to see that there's a little more there, and we're going to put them side by side and see if we can, by mixing the two together, get a good sense of what Proposition 1 is all about. So let's see where Proclus started his metaphysics. And what he saw as the main thing that we need to look at is that every manifold in some way participates unity. I'm using the E.R. Dodd's translation here. So for anything to exist, it must have unity. Our bodies have unity to them. We have many parts to our bodies at the cellular level, millions of parts, billions, but we see one body. And of course, when we die, our bodies decompose. They no longer exist as a body. Or this book, it exists as a unity. If I were to take it apart, take off the binding, and scatter the pages, it would no longer be a book. So everything that exists must have unity. And that's what he saw as that first cause of all, that first condition. So let's take a look at how he unfolds this. And each proposition, by the way, for those of you new to this book, it starts with the proposition itself is like one or two sentences, and then there's a short explanation. He says, suppose that a manifold in no way participating unity. So we're going to imagine a hypothetical. There's many, but there's no unity to it. And then he says that neither this manifold as a whole nor any of its several parts will be one. And so as an example, let's take a look at this infinity symbol. Now, in order for it to be an infinity symbol, it has to have that shape. It has to have some limit. And that's what gives it its unity. Now we want to take the unity away, so we have something more like this. But this is still not enough, because now it's made up of infinite parts. But each of those parts has a unity to it. So for our hypothetical, we have to take away even that unity. And each of these parts cannot be a one. Each part is itself an infinity. And then each of those parts is an infinity, and on and on. He says each part will itself be a manifold of parts, and so on to infinity. And of this infinity of parts, each once more will be infinitely manifold. For a manifold which in no way participates any unity, neither as a whole, nor in respect of its parts severally, will be infinite in every way and in respect of every part. For each part of the manifold, take which you will, must be either one or not one. And if it's not one, then it's either many or it's nothing. But if each part be nothing, then the whole is nothing. And if it's many, then it must be made up of an infinity of infinites. And this, of course, is impossible. For on the one hand, nothing which is made up of an infinity of infinites, since the infinite cannot be exceeded, yet the single part is exceeded by the sum. Okay, now what is this next point he's making? The absurdity he's pointing out here we can understand looking again at this picture. So imagine this is one of the parts, and each part is an infinity itself. Now the problem is that a part is always smaller than the whole. My finger is smaller than the whole of my body. One page of this book is smaller than the whole book, and so on. But if a part is infinite, then it cannot be smaller than the whole. And so that's just another absurdity that would follow from this hypothetical. And so his conclusion, so it can't be an infinity of infinites, but on the other hand, nothing can be made up of parts which are nothing, right? Because a bunch of nothings would just give you nothing. And so his conclusion is that every manifold in some way participates unity. So when you strip away all the religious language and cultural language and so on, this is what you get. So we can debate whether God is good or God is merciful and all these other claims that religions make. But the one thing that we all have to agree, whether we come from a spiritual background or an atheistic background, regardless of our culture, the time we're born, if we're looking at this with pure logic, we see that anything that exists must in some way participate unity. And this, in metaphysics, we call it the one, or we also call it the first principle. It is that first condition, and other conditions build from there. And from here, actually, he's going to go on to introduce another name for this first principle, the good. And then his famous Proposition 13 is equating the one and the good. And I did a video on that a few months ago. I'll link it at the end for those of you curious about it. And then from there, he's going to go on to build other conditions and build the whole metaphysics from there. Now, I mentioned before his Theology of Plato. This book follows very much the same structure. It's broken up into many sections, and they call them books, and each book is made up of many chapters. Books 2 through 6 pretty much follow the same structure as Elements of Theology. He starts from those first conditions and then builds to reality itself, and then all the realms up to, he goes through the level of the individual soul, or what he calls the partial soul. So that's books 2 through 6 in the theology. Book 1 is the setup, discussing his organization. He bases it mostly on Plato's Parmenides, and so there's a bit about the Parmenides here as well. And also this translation, this is Thomas Taylor that I'm going to be using, and he added a book 7 because in chapter 1, when Proclus was talking about his organization, he suggested that Plato went all the way beyond the realm of soul to nature and the realm of the material world and the gods that overlook those realms. And so Thomas Taylor surmised that maybe book 7 was lost. And so he gathered different passages, different things that Proclus had written from like his commentary on the Timaeus and other places. And he put together a makeshift book 7. Now maybe there never was a book 7. If this followed the same structure as Elements of Theology, maybe there never was, we don't know. But anyway, it is useful and helpful and interesting, so you don't look a gift horse in the mouth, right? So anyway, this starts this structure based on, or same following the Elements of Theology, starts from book 2. And what we're going to see is that in this book as well, Proclus took the same idea that all must start from unity. And here's how he worded it. He says, if then beings are many, and in such a manner many as we've mentioned from the beginning, so that the one is not anywhere to be found, then many absurdities will happen to be the result. Or rather, all the nature of beings will at once from the first be destroyed, as there will immediately be nothing which is capable of participating the one. For it must be admitted that every being is either one certain thing or it's nothing. Just one translation point is that Thomas Taylor, instead of using unity, used the one. Also in his Elements, his very first one, actually let me find it, I'll read it to you. His Proposition 1, he worded it as, all multitude participates in a certain respect of the one. So where you see the one here, perhaps Dodds would have used unity, so same idea is being expressed. He says, farther still, if the many alone have a subsistence, as has been said, so we're using that same hypothetical, then all things will be infinitely infinite. So there it is again. And if you receive any one of the infinites, whatever, this also will be immediately infinite. And with respect to the things from which this consists and which are infinite, each of these likewise will be infinite. Right? So as soon as you imagine one part, you have to break it into an infinity. All of those parts, they're not ones, you have to break those into infinities as well. For let something of the many be assumed, which we say is not one. This therefore will be multitude according to its own nature, since it belongs to beings, but is not nothing. If, however, it is multitude, this also will consist of many things, and will be many. And if you assume something of these manys, then this will immediately appear to you not to be one, but many. And so there you can see it's a little bit more explanation. There will likewise be immediately the same reasoning in these, and in a similar manner each, because we falsely speak of each, will be multitude in energy. So now he's introducing the idea of energy. And he's pointing out also that our language is limiting us, because we can't really talk about each if there's no one. We can't talk about a part or the part or anything that implies one. But for lack of other language, we have to use that language, but understand that we're using it loosely. And each, as I may say, speaking loosely, will be infinite, or rather, will be infinitely infinite. And now he's going to bring in another idea. This one is not in Proposition 1. It actually comes in Proposition 11. And this is something that would follow from Proposition 1. That if being is infinitely infinite, being can neither be known nor discovered, since the infinite is entirely incomprehensible and unknown. Big problem for Platonists, since one of the assumptions or one of the hypotheses that we're working from, is that there is a reality and that we can know it and we can know its causes. Now he's also going to bring in another idea which is not directly stated in Proposition 1. It is implied, but it's not stated. But here he's stating it directly. And it's about number. So I'm going to read through this first and then I'll say a few words about it. All right. Moreover, there is no number of beings if the one in no respect is. But all things and each thing will not be one. For the particle of number, the monad, is one. And every number itself is one. For if there are 5 monads, there is also the pentad. And if there are 3 monads, then you have the triad. But the triad itself is a certain unity, and so is the pentad. So that if there is no one, there will neither be any part nor the whole of numbers. And so what we saw in Proposition 1 is that we went directly from nothing to infinity, nothing in between. We cannot have number if there is no one. And what we see in metaphysics is that while counting, we can use 1 as a number. We can count 1, 2, 3, and so on. In metaphysics, 1 is not a number. 1 is the condition for number. And number becomes important in metaphysics when we get to the unfolding of reality. We'll see as he goes on that there are monads and there are proper numbers that follow. There's one being itself, and then a number of beings that follow in its train. There's mind itself. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice. There's mind itself, and then the number of intellects that follow. Beauty itself and number of beauties. Justice itself and number of justices, and so on. And so for the unfolding of reality, number is very important. And so he points that out at the beginning as well. And then this also follows from, this is actually also part of Proposition 11, the idea of knowledge, carrying it even further, that neither will there be knowledge of beings, plural, if the one is not. So not only can we not know causes, but we wouldn't know their consequence either. For it would not be possible either to speak or think of any being. We couldn't have any ideas if we didn't have unities of thoughts. I couldn't be talking to you right now if there wasn't a unity of words and sentences. You couldn't be understanding what you're hearing, a cacophony of sounds, of infinite sounds. You can't make anything out. So if there was no one, there also could be no knowledge of beings. For each thing itself and everything of which we can speak and in which we impress the nature of the one will have no existence, because neither does the one exist. So without the one, nothing can exist. If, however, a different hypothetical, imagine if the one participates the many and the many of the one, and both these are in each other. So now we've done away with the possibility, the hypothetical, that there's a many but no one. Now we're saying, what if the one and the many coexist as a kind of dyad, as a dual first principle? Well, he says, if this happened, it is necessary that there should be another nature besides these, which is neither one nor many. For both of these being mingled in each other, it is necessary that there should be a cause of their mixture, which conjoins multitude to the one and the one to multitude. So if you had this double first principle, the one and the many both at the same power, you'd still have to imagine something above them that unifies them. And so you still go back to the one, or to unity, as the first cause. And Plato, by the way, deals with that in the dialogue Philebus. And so we're still back to the same conclusion. From these things, therefore, it is necessary that the many should participate of the one, that the one should be unmingled with multitude, and that nothing should be better than the one, but that this should be the cause of being to the many. And so the one then is our first cause, that first principle, that first condition for all to be. Okay, well, if you enjoyed that, I would appreciate you hitting the like button, and feel free to leave comments below or send me an email if you have a question you'd like me to address directly. If you don't subscribe already, I hope you will. And I do put out a new video each week. And next week, I'm going to change gears. I will come back to Elements of Theology, but next week I'm going to switch gears, go back to the more practical side, because that is also very important. A few weeks ago, I did a video introducing how to deal with false beliefs, and I want to come back and add to that. So that's going to be next week, and then I'll come back to Elements of Theology after that. So thank you very much, and I do hope you'll join me next week.